There's going to be a resurgence of the comic book industry. That's funny. Now available in paperback and e-readers. Isis, Dark Incubus. The goddess next door gets enthralled in a romantic entanglement with an evil incubus in this all-new Isis series adventure. Get your copy of Isis, Dark Incubus in paperback and e-readers today. Better get the coleslaw, y'all, cause we're having us a barbecue. I had some comments from some viewers who seem to be completely out of touch as related to the overall dire state of the comic book industry. Now, one of these viewers wants to believe that there will be a resurgence of the comic book industry in the 21st century, but I'm here to throw some cold water on that delusion. Now, when it comes to the comic book industry at this point is at a point of no return, and it's at a point of no return because there's basically no way to appeal to the younger reader that the industry desperately needs to survive. Now, back in 1987, when I was 13 years old, the median age for a comic book reader was 13 years old, and that was considered to be the perfect age for the core customer for comics because this was a customer that could basically grow up with the product and basically eventually age out and transition to bring in a new generation of younger readers. That was the original plan as related for the demographics of comics. Unfortunately, when it came to comics, Gen X was basically the beginning of the end as related to the younger reader, as related to the medium, because in the 1990s, what happened was the rise of video games as related to the 16-bit platform became the form of entertainment for most millennials. And as those millennials began getting involved with video games, the comic book stopped becoming popular. Now, I know this firsthand because as a Gen Xer, I wanted to introduce my cousin to comics, but after he got his first Madden cartridge for Sega Genesis, it was on its way to not being his thing, and eventually once Tomb Raider came out for PS1, that was a wrap as related to comic books and millennials. And ever since then, the industry has been on a major state of decline. This happened along with some bad business decisions over at Marvel and as related to changing its editorial style from having one editor-in-chief to having multiple editors in 1995. This, coupled with Marvel's purchase of Heroes World, basically led to the bankruptcy of Marvel, and a couple of years later, DC found itself on the same trajectory when Jeanette Kahn decided to step down as president of DC, and Dan Didio was put in charge, and this basically started the beginning of the end of the comic book industry. And as we started to see editorial not really have that strong vision that Jeanette Kahn and Jim Shooter had in the 80s, we started to see the quality of these comics start to decline. And in addition to seeing the start of the quality of these comics start to decline as related to the lack of editorial vision, we also started to see the median age of a comic book reader basically creep up to the point where at 2011, the median age of a comic book reader was 35 years old. And right now, here at 2024, the median age of a comic book reader is 50 years old. And when you have a product that has a median age of 50 years old, basically that product is that product is on its way to being phased out because the customer has nowhere to grow outside of having one foot on a banana peel and the other on a casket. So the customer for the comic has gotten so old that the industry can no longer be able to sustain itself as related to its core customer base. And what exacerbates this whole situation is that there are no younger customers coming into the business. No, that whole group of customers basically started the end of that line as related to a large customer base when millennials shifted from comic books over to video games, and that whole trajectory hasn't changed in 30 years. And you can't explain this to many of these guys who are just spellbound as related to thinking comics are going to come back. No, as somebody who has been in this business of entertainment for over 25 years, I can tell you that the customer isn't coming back. The same way VHS tapes aren't coming back because they don't even manufacture VCRs anymore. And the customer isn't coming back, and the business is just not sustainable at this point. Because once you do the math as related to comics today, you basically see that the infrastructure just isn't there when a nation of 335 million people to facilitate any sort of resurgence. No, ever since about 2015, with the start of the all new, all different Marvel, we have been seeing so many comic shops close, even in the face of movements like Comicsgate, which were trying to create independent comics on crowdfunding platforms. We have seen the number of comic shops go from being 10,000 in the 90s to 3,000 by about 2015 to now barely being about 300. So there is no infrastructure to be able to maintain the distribution of comics because comic shops basically are not even a blip on the radar as related to specialty shops. Again, when you do the math, 335 million people in a country, and you only have about 300 shops all across the nation, you basically don't even have enough infrastructure to be able to maintain the sales of comics, which are basically at an all-time low. I mean, right now, you have books like The Amazing Spider-Man. Again, this book in 1989 was basically selling anywhere from 500,000 to 750,000 copies a month. And you have books like Batman, which were basically, again, selling 500,000 to 750,000 books a month. And Uncanny X-Men, which was basically selling almost a million copies a month. These were books that were basically selling strong, and even mid-list books like Iron Man, which were selling 250,000 copies a month. These books were selling in enough numbers in order to pull a profit for many of the comic book stores, which basically eked out their business on a razor-thin margin. But if you were able to sell enough units, you would be able to cover your bills. But these days, many comic shops really can't cover their bills because many of the books are so terrible that they de-incentivize customers from being able to have a motivation to purchase them. Moreover, this is exacerbated by all of the numerous reboots and continuity reshuffles that make it harder for the new reader to come in or the older reader to stay interested. So the overall comic book industry, when you do the math, isn't there anymore. No, it's not there when your median age is 50, when your whole network of stores is down to a couple of hundred, and you've basically lost your readership. And even worse, you lost your last opportunity at your last great hope of getting customers with the Marvel Cinematic Universe by not going out here and making sure that the books were consistent with what people were seeing in the movies, like they were in 1989 when DC had the Batman movie out. When DC had the Batman movie out, and Batmania was going on in 1989, this led to people being motivated to go check out Batman comics, which were available at newsstands, available at comic shops like Forbidden Planet here in New York, and also available at drugstores. I mean, Batman sales shot up due to the Batman movie, but the MCU, which basically introduced kids to Marvel characters, there was no effort to synergize this to reach out to those new customers. And with that last gasp, what happened after the Avengers Endgame movie, we saw basically the beginning of the end of the comic book business here in America. We saw the beginning of the end after Phase 4 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because Now that the median age of a comic book reader was 50 years old, this was not a product that could be sustainable for the business of Disney or Warner Brothers Discovery as related to long-term business. No, with these books basically barely selling 10,000 to 15,000 copies a month, that's not money for this business. No, when it comes to publishing, if you want to talk about success, you have to talk about selling books in large aggregate numbers, because that means that you're reaching a large portion of the nation. A book that sells 10,000 or 15,000, that ain't even a neighborhood here in the Bronx. No, that's not even a housing project in the Bronx. 15,000 people is good for an indie book that is basically, again, coming out in the 90s. A 90s bad girl book was doing 15,000 sales back in the 90s, but for a mainstream book to be doing those kind of numbers, that's not profitable for a business, a corporation at all. No, what they considered to be a cutoff as related to canceling a book back in the day was 100,000 sales or 75,000 sales. That was considered to be a cutoff book in the mid to late 90s. And right now, today's comics barely, again, sell 10,000 copies, and that's because the median age of a comic book reader is 50 years old, and there's no way to reach the younger customer who's basically moved on to their cell phone, moved on to their tablets, moved on to devices. People have basically moved on, and again, this new generation of kids is not interested in buying 32-page comics, but you'll have folks who go out here talking about, oh, there's gonna be a resurgence. Well, how is there gonna be a resurgence if there's no way for the customer to find the product? Critical question I have to ask many of those delusional individuals who were in the comment section of one of my videos: how is the customer going to find a product if there's no store that sells it, and most stores have no incentive to sell it because there's no returnability? I mean, a magazine like Vogue, they can rip the cover off that magazine and get store credit for it, but a comic, you buy it and you're stuck with it. And sadly, many comic shops wound up closing because they were stuck with so many bad comics, and they were stuck with so many bad comics from New 52, All New, All Different Marvel, and the era of Dan Didio, that they basically are just stuck with all of this junk, and they can't move this junk, and this junk is basically creating a bottleneck that keeps the older readers from wanting to read because the continuity has been so damaged structurally, and the continuity is so confusing for the younger reader that they just don't care. I mean, it's easier to follow a manga like One Piece or a manga like Dragon Ball than to follow this stuff at Marvel and DC. And people are sitting there talking about, oh, there's gonna be a resurgence. No, there's not going to be a resurgence at this point. No, not gonna be a resurgence because the business infrastructure is not there. The editorial does not have the vision. The continuity in and of itself is so broken and structurally damaged. There is no comeback for comics. No, it's basically over at this point. And people are just sitting there waiting and watching for the entire structure to just fall completely apart. I mean, it's very similar to what happened in the 1950s with the comic book industry before Stan Lee came out with Fantastic Four #1 and ushered in the Marvel Age of comics. Right now, what's happening is we're in that same type of dark period, because this time it's basically the end as related to this era of comics, because you just don't have the audience there at this point. No, you don't have the audience there. And again, with technology changing everything, the kids just don't care anymore. For them, these are grandpa's comics. These are grandpa's stories. And again, the only books that are really selling at comic shops these days are old back issues and old and trades of older material. When it comes to what really is supposed to keep the industry buoyant, which is books that are recently coming out, none of those books are moving. And in fact, these books, they'll start out with a strong new #1, but then crash and burn after about the third or fourth issue, where the sales just aren't there. And that's not good for a publishing business because, as I've said in multiple videos, The publishing business is a sales business. That's what Jim Shooter understood. A lot of people want to talk bad about Jim Shooter, but again, he was rough and hard because he knew this was a hard business. And with it being a hard business, because sales is a hard business, sales is tough, sales is hard. You've got to get those numbers. And if a book ain't pulling the numbers, then you gotta cancel the book, and that's a hard thing to do. I can tell you that firsthand. I've had to discontinue books because they didn't sell, and it's a hard thing to do. But it's, again, you don't mean to be hard on people, but they have to understand how rough this business is, because if books aren't selling, you're not gonna make any money. And again, in order for the IP to have value, you have to be moving a certain amount of units. And sadly, when it comes to mainstream comics, they're not moving enough units, not moving enough units at all. But you got folks out here who are delusional, who want to sit there and think there's going to be a resurgence. And some of them sitting there thinking, oh, that there's going to be this resurgence because some guy's graphic novel or some guy's comic got some sort of what they thought was a Netflix or TV deal. But as someone who knows the entertainment industry, I can tell you what happened in some of these cases is some of these folks basically got an option from one of these guys in Hollywood, and they don't understand the difference between an option and a sale for the film and TV rights. There's a big difference between an option and a film and TV rights deal. An option is, yeah, they'll give you some money in the beginning for your property, and then what they will do after they give you that check is look to shop your property around. And after they shop your property around, what happens is your property basically is known by all the studios. It gets listed, and then you're not going to be able to sell that product because these guys were just, again, shopping it around, seeing if they could get the financing. Whereas the difference between that and a film and TV rights deal is when you sign a film and TV rights deal, you are basically signing either the film or the TV rights to the studio. And again, the studio may or may not greenlight that project, but the whole thing is once you sell the rights, you basically are able to get some payment and also possibly get some residuals and even possibly get a contract to be either an executive producer or a writer. That's a better deal than an option because option is a garbage deal. Option is garbage all around. You do not want an option deal. But a lot of people, they'll get that Netflix deal thinking, oh, it's a deal, but no, it's an option. And again, you've been shopped around, and then when it's time for you to go out here and get an agent, and what you really need, you need an agent in order to get these types of film and TV rights deals. You need an agent to do this stuff. That's why when somebody comes to you and says, oh, I'm just going to shop it around as related to an option, don't do that deal. No, but you got folks, again, who are out here talking about comics, don't know nothing about the entertainment business, don't know how it operates, and they're going to tell me, again, there's going to be this resurgence. Again, you can't have a resurgence when you have a nation of 330 million people, and your books are only barely, again, selling to comic stores 10,000, because that's not actual books sold. No, that's books sold to the comic book store under the direct market. You've only sold 10,000, again, of top-tier characters like Spider-Man and Batman. That's not even, again, a neighborhood here in the Bronx. No, again, when it comes to resurgence, we have to start thinking about scaling up these numbers. Again, if your numbers are in the six figures, people, they start to cock an eyebrow. Okay, he sold 100,000 units. If he sold 250,000 units, people start to, again, take another look at you. When you sell 500,000 units, people start to look at your interest and get really interested. And when you move 1,000,000 units, this is where people start to take you seriously and start talking about, hey, maybe we need to start talking about getting those rights and acquiring those rights and making an adaptation. That's where people start to take you seriously. But when you start talking about, 10,000 units, 5,000 units, 1,000 units, yeah, those are okay numbers for an indie publisher, but those are not numbers that people take seriously in the entertainment business. No, especially when your median age is 50. I mean, right now, the CW basically abandoned all of its Berlanti verse because they found out that the median age of their viewer was 58 years old and not the young customers they were going for. What the CW wanted to go for were tweens and teens. That was the core customer they were looking for, similar to what happened in 1987. In 1987, the median age of, again, a comic book reader was 13 years old. So with a 13-year-old, they basically saw a customer they could grow with. They saw a customer they could invest in. They saw a customer who they could sell to and basically look to appeal to. They don't see that with a 50-year-old, because a 50-year-old usually is old and set in their ways. And they cannot get that customer to change from their brands that they've wedded themselves to be accustomed to. So they don't want to sell to that older customer. They want that young customer. And sadly, the comic book business has not done a good job of selling to the young customer. They have not done a great job of selling to the young customer. And this is why the business is in its last days, because we didn't do that job of selling to the younger customer. No, many people basically who are in the business didn't pass the craft on to the next generation. And since they didn't pass it on to the next generation, like myself, so we could go out here and make products for the younger customers, because that was what my goal was before I walked away from the business. I wanted to make product for the younger customer, the PG-13 all ages customer, the young customer that the business desperately needs. And sadly, this business doesn't value that young customer, and that's why it's going out. It's going out because we don't value the young customer. We don't understand the value of young customers to this business, and in keeping the business going, you need that young customer, and sadly, the comic book business doesn't have that young customer. No, again, when your median age is 50, you're on your way out. You're on your way out, like many products like Oldsmobile and many other products like Crown Pilot crackers and marshmallow cookies. These were products that basically appeal to old customers, and businesses want to get the young customer. They want to get that young customer, and they want to get that median age shaved down to a younger customer. This is what people who are on Comics YouTube don't understand about the business that I understand, that again, you need that young customer, because that young customer, again, can grow with the product, pass the product on to their kids. And that's what didn't happen with comics, because comics got stuck with Gen X. And as millennials tried to come in, eventually other products were offered, and the video game industry wound up taking those customers. And right now, it's more profitable to make a video game than make a comic. It's more profitable to go out here and make video games, because you can take that same concept and you can go out here, sell the rights to that concept for millions of dollars, continue to own those rights, and continue to make multiple games. And you can make more money in video games than you can with comics, or you can go out here and make licensed merchandising and still make money. So comics used to be a business that people would go in, but only a lot of guys are going into those businesses now with crowdfunding, because it was a business that was viable until Indiegogo and Kickstarter started getting personal. I mean, Kickstarter basically makes most of its money by producing NSFW or adult style comics, and Indiegogo has become a bit of a nightmare based on what I've heard from John De La Rose and many others. And again, it is just this business again isn't really creating those guys who get the big deals. I mean, yeah, they'll make money as related to the numbers, but once you break down the expenses, they don't really make that much money on these comics. No, they don't make much money on these comics at all. So a lot of these guys who dropped in my comment section, they don't really understand the business of comics. They don't understand the business of publishing. I have been in this business for years, and again, it's 9 out of 10 books fail, and with 9 out of 10 books fail, and these days 10 out of 10 books failing, this business doesn't have much life left into it. Doesn't have much life left into it at all. I mean, comics will basically eventually become a niche product, like I said a few years ago, for print on demand, and eventually that's the way it's going. The only way you're going to be able to sustain your costs, because these books again cost thousands of dollars to print. And if they're not moving, you're basically throwing good money after bad, especially if your median age are older. If you older people, you're not going to be able to sustain your business if your customers are, or baby boomers and Gen Xers are dying out. You're not going to be able to sustain that business because many of these people don't know how to write for younger customers. And again, those who can write for younger customers, if they're smart, they go on and move on to TV or to film or to video games where they can make more money. But the whole American comic book as it stands is an obsolete product. It's an obsolete product with one foot on in a grave and the other straight on a banana peel. Now, my first comic, John Haynes at Death's Door, if you want to check it out, is available on Lulu.com, and you can pick it up for the same price as the 2022 Kickstarter by clicking the link in the description box. And my other comic, Esteem No Good Deed, is available on Kindle for 99 cents right now, and you can pick that book up on Amazon Kindle, and you can also pick it up at other online booksellers as Esteem Blast from the Past and paperback, and you can also pick up the SJS Direct Universe books on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find them at other online booksellers like Draft to Digital, Google Play, Barnes & Noble, and big box retailers like Walmart and Target. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.